All right, well, I'm going to move on to the digital museums part. So digital museums are something that I've also started incorporating in some of my history classes. So I started doing them in more, so I do the podcast in 100 level classes, so mostly aimed at first year students, again, getting them used to doing some research, helping them practice other forms of writing. And then the museums, I started incorporating my 300 level history classes to help them take the research skills they might have learned as first year students and apply that in much more depth. And then this past spring, I also experimented doing a museum in a 100 level class. So I've now done them in both. And I can talk a little bit more about the differences between the different kinds of students who use these kinds of projects. But I'm not going to really go over this again because it's very similar to why I do the podcast project. Again, variation, giving students some creative control over their learning, different ways of communicating, and learning how to practice other forms of digital literacy are important for the museum. So I'll show you a little bit about the technology that is required for something like this, and then show you examples of student museum projects. So it's this one is even less technology than the podcast, because all I do, and it's very simple, I'm not a web designer, is I use Wix.com, in which there are pre-made templates that I just edit the words to make it what I want for my class. And so that is the easiest, simplest way to do this. And then students can create free accounts to edit and publish their own exhibits, right? So they create their own accounts, they publish their own exhibits within my website. So that's very easy. Other options, you can use other blogging platforms that exist. If you're very good at building websites, which I know many of you are, you can just create your own and have it look like whatever you want. So really, any level of comfort you have with using blogs and websites, you can adapt to this. And then I also want to mention, I've never used Omeka before. I think Miranda, you are an expert in this, so talk to Miranda about Omeka. This is a more professional software designed for digital exhibits. It's very impressive and a little intimidating to me, but I'm sure if we sat down together, I would be very confident about learning how to use it. But if you want to do like an actual, something more like what Carlin was talking about earlier, that's what Omeka will help you do, unlike my very simplistic version, which you'll see in a moment that my students work on. Okay, so with that, I'll show you my Wix site and some of the different projects that my students have done. So I've done 3 now, and I started last spring in my British Empire class with a project that I called, and this was less of a museum and more of a collection of biographies and stories. And then I moved into more of a museum format, which I'll show you. But I'll quickly show you the first website that they built. And again, what I did, this is a Wix site that I think this was like a fashion blog or something, that I just changed the words and the image. And I called it the Imperial Acts Project, Stories of Empire, in which they trace the life and times of a person or a group of people in the British Empire, and they told their stories. And they did this again based on archival research that they did using a database our library subscribes to that has primary sources. And also, again, academic research to tell this story and tell us what they think this story tells them about the British Empire. So I'll show you one example. This student focused on Phyllis Wheatley and her poetry. And you can see this is about what this exhibit looked like. There's only one image, and it was really a lot more analysis than a museum exhibit, which I'll show you an example of in a moment. But what this student did that I really liked was she really focused on diving into the context of Phyllis Wheatley's poetry, how the imperial context of Imperial Britain shaped what was possible in this poetry and how it can be interpreted. And I emphasized to the students when they created these exhibits that they're, again, thinking about communicating to a public audience, right? So if someone is doing research or wants to learn about the British Empire or about these individuals, what is it that you want to tell them? What is it that their story has to tell you about this person and about the British Empire in general? And so in this project, students did all of this, again, based on quite extensive primary and secondary source research. So again, they're taking some of those things they might have learned as first-year students and really going in depth. And these were about 1,500 words. So these were quite long, in-depth projects. And so at the end of it, you can see there were multiple examples that students chose different topics, individuals. A music major chose to analyze a song, so he kind of melded his interests with the history class. I had a global business student look into the East India Company. So again, it gives students an opportunity to be interdisciplinary as well as they think about how to meld their major and their interests with the class that they are taking. And then at the end of this, they presented their work to the class and they commented on each other's projects. So I'll go into more detail on that in a moment. Then I thought, well, that biography project was really fun and interesting for the students. I was like, but what if we use these to actually make kind of a museum? So I told students, like, imagine you walk into the Museum of Modern Britain. So this was for a Modern Britain class. And you have, this amount of time to tell them or show them what is modern Britain, what do we need to know about it. And so in this, they worked individually to choose artifacts from British history, and then they used the artifacts to then talk about aspects of British history that they thought were of interest and what they wanted to say about modern Britain. So I'll show you an example. This one was about the Opium Wars. And I asked students to begin with a research question and then try to answer it as they analyzed their artifacts and again incorporated their research. And so this student chose his artifacts, a teapot and a painting, and I'll show you some of the things that he did. And so he first analyzed the teapot and the importance of tea in Britain. So he launched off of the story of the teapot, then talked about the role of tea in the British Empire and how it led to increasing tension between Britain and China. And then he segued into a painting in which he analyzed the painting and what it might have said about British imperial identity during the Opium Wars. And again, as he's analyzing all of this, he's incorporating, again, academic research that he's done to go deeper into the meaning of the artifacts and also this time period in British history that the artifacts are involved with. And then at the end, he finished with a conclusion. And you can see again that this is based on secondary source research, and also, in this case, their primary sources were images instead of documents. And so I told students, imagine that you walk into a museum and you see a teapot and a painting and a picture of poppies. What would the text be next to those artifacts to tell us about the world that they came from? What do all of the artifacts all together tell us about this time period and about the people who lived in it? And so they're supposed to kind of introduce that in their introduction and then have a conclusion to their exhibit. So you're walking around a room touring these artifacts, and then at the end, what do you want your audience to take away? And so that was for, again, this is a 300 level class in which they all worked individually, 1,500 word exhibits, in which they were required to analyze artifacts and use secondary source research to help them do this. And then the last example, and this is the one I piloted in a 100 level class this semester, and this time I gave them the option to work by themselves or as a group. Because again, I wanted to give them that option to do collaborative writing if they wanted to. And in this one, I'll give you an example. This group of 2 students decided to contrast the Berlin Wall and then the current controversy over the border wall with Mexico. And so they're trying to connect past and present. And so you see here that this one is going to be a little bit shorter because it was for a 100 level class. And so their requirements were not quite as extensive as for the 300 level class. But again, they're still incorporating peer-reviewed academic research and trying to tell the story of the Berlin Wall and then bringing that up to the present with contemporary connections. And they also asked students in this version of the museum exhibit to peer review each other's exhibits before they finally published them. So they turned in drafts of their exhibit to me, which I commented on, then they published them, and then they read each other's work and they said, well, I like this. I'm wondering if you should incorporate this instead. Or maybe you could organize it a little bit differently, or I have these questions. Right? So after they commented on each other's exhibits, they then had the chance to revise based on their peers' feedback for their final version, which they presented to each other in class at the very end of the semester. So I found that the peer review component of doing this project was really important and also great for increasing student engagement as they talked about each other's work and read it. One thing I'll note about this is that was really fun before I go into what the students reported is I don't know if you noticed the views that these exhibits are getting. So this one got 31, this one got 17, this one got 11, so it tracks the views. And then this one got 217. So what these students did is they shared their exhibit on like Twitter and stuff and got their friends and family to click on it, sent it around because they just really wanted to get a lot of views. And it became this, they almost had bragging rights, like they had the most popular exhibit and they were like, we went viral, we have 217 views. And so that also is something that they like to do as well. So students will often share their work to broader audiences as well. So that gets us back to what if students reflected about what they learned in doing museum exhibits. So writing, similar to podcasts, but in this, I mean, the writing for a museum exhibit is closer to what you write for an essay than a podcast. Because really what it is an essay posted online. But the students feel like it's not like writing an essay, but that's what they're doing. But but they also are thinking about writing for a different audience. They're thinking about writing for the public. They're also thinking about writing for their peers, and they are writing based on things that they're interested in. So they talk about, as they reflect on what they learned about writing, they learn about how to use research and apply it creatively. They love seeing their writing published. So they all talk about, like, when I pressed click and saw it published, it was just so satisfying. And again, they're sharing it with other people because they love that feeling. They said it was more rewarding than writing essays because they got to choose their topic, but also they like to be able to work around photos or be able to break up their writing so it was a little bit more interactive. And then they're like, I've written enough essays this semester. And this gives me the chance to do something. But again, they are writing another essay. It doesn't feel like an essay. Research again. They talk about how, again, it's similar to the podcast, learning how to apply research, but also it really helps them go into depth. So thinking about how to use the skills that they learned in the class or in other classes, apply it, and then learning how to research in different fields, and the sense of satisfaction of seeing the product that they had created. Another thing with the museum projects is I really see these as deep dives into a topic because they have to do a lot of research to trace the history and the story of an artifact or a person. And so the students report things like, we get to be the experts instead of just the professor being the expert who's always kind of evaluating or judging us. I love this comment right here because the student's like, I thought I knew everything about my topic. He was researching Winston Churchill, I think. But he's like, but it turns out that I actually didn't know anything about Winston Churchill. And so I learned that assuming that you know something isn't the best way to approach a project. You actually have to do in-depth research. And then this one, he's like, I already knew how to search databases. You learn how to do that. But he's like, but I didn't actually know how to use the databases to explore topics that I was interested in. And so he loved that opportunity to be able to apply those skills. Also learning from peers, similar to a podcast, but something about the museum exhibit that's different from the podcast is it's not as awkward as listening to your voice. So the students love the presentation part of the exhibits because they're so proud of their work that they've published, and they get to show it off. And so they like this, they really report on museum exhibits that learning from their peers gives them this kind of fresh perspective. Right? They've learned a lot from the professor, but now they get to learn from each other, and they get to teach to others. And they like that, they don't usually get to learn about each other and what they're interested in. They're always learning based on what the professor gives to them, so they really like that. And then they got to see and learn about subjects that they wouldn't have known about because I didn't choose to teach them about it, so they got to learn about it from each other. And the last thing, also similar podcast project, it's very engaging for them at the end of the semester in particular. They like being able to choose their own topics, which should come as no surprise. They report that it's a lot more work than writing an essay, but they would still rather do it. Because they said, it's fun, I get to show it to people. It's not just me writing an essay that I turn into a professor. And then, they have this sense of ownership over the knowledge that they have created, that it's something that is worthwhile. And it helps them to cover topics that we wouldn't have discussed otherwise. So these are just examples of things, again, that students have reported from their reflections. And I don't want to, by sharing the comments for the podcast in this, create an illusion that every student loves these projects. And there are exceptions. There are students who hate group work. There are students who it's easier to respond to a prompt than come up with your own ideas and your own research. It's awkward to hear your own voice, things like that. But for the most part, I find that the majority of students like doing projects like this for many of the reasons that they've shared in their comments. So, just to kind of wrap up, these are the steps that I implement from the museum project, but again, this can totally be adaptable to your classes, how you want to do them if you choose to incorporate a project like this. But I begin by having students choose their topics, and then we brainstorm how to do research in class, what a museum exhibit is, and that takes about 30 minutes. And then for this, instead of doing like a form or a treatment, I have them write a proposal. So kind of like a little research proposal. What's your topic? Why did you choose it? What sources have you found? What do you want to communicate to your audience about it? Then we spend about 30 minutes in class learning how to design the exhibit, which again is very easy because at least for me using Wix, it's really easy to use. And so it just gives the students a chance to have some time in class making sure there's no glitches or technical problems. Then they review their exhibits. Then they present their exhibits, but they've already read each other's work, so they don't need a ton of time to present. But it gives them, again, this chance. And I say, okay, you have 5 minutes. What's your exhibit about? What do you want people to take away? Like, go. And then they get to talk about what they did, and then they publish their final exhibit in the reflection. And I took, again, the reflections to kind of populate those slides with their feedback. So that's my steps for museum exhibits, and that's all I have. So does anyone have questions about those projects?
Do students in your upcoming semesters get to look at the exhibits from previous semesters, and do you have reflection? You have reflection on that. Yes, I do let my students see work from previous semesters, and I tell them, this is how I've changed it based on student feedback from previous ones, but they like to see examples of what these look like and kind of what's expected of them. Any other questions?
Yeah. Is your Wix account public or private? Meaning that do outsiders have access to?
This is public.
Oh, it is public.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so then I don't go out and share it, but the students do, and anyone can see the website.
Okay.
So each student creates one page, or you create one page and other students collaborate?
So I create this page. So again, I just took an existing template and changed the picture and the words. And then they create their own exhibit within it. So it's very easy to do, like even inserting pictures. They just click a little picture box. They can copy and paste text from a Word document, and they can hyperlink things if they want. So it's very easy for them to use. Okay, I think I'm out of time. So thank you very much for giving me your attention.